Have you ever stopped to think about why you chose that specific vacation? Why Paris and not Peru? Why a beach getaway instead of a city adventure? You probably think it was all your idea, right? Well, what if I told you the story of your trip was written long before you ever even booked a flight? Today we're going to pull back the curtain on the invisible scripts that are really guiding our travels.
You know, this might sound like a joke, but it's a real complaint a tourist actually made in Australia, and it tells you everything you need to know. We don't just travel to a place, we travel to an idea of a place that's already in our heads. So when reality doesn't live up to the movie in our mind, it can be a little jarring. It begs the question, where do we get these powerful stories in the first place?
And that leads us to a pretty provocative idea. Your vacation isn't really yours. I know, that sounds crazy. That dream trip you've been saving up for, the one you've been planning down to the last detail, in a lot of ways, it wasn't your dream to begin with.
Yep. The urge to see the pyramids, to walk the ancient streets of Rome, or just to chill out on a perfect tropical beach. That's all part of a much bigger, much older story. It's like these ideas were planted in our culture, just waiting for us to find them, shaped by forces that have been churning away for centuries.
So, what's the engine driving all of this? It's something called a master narrative. The best way to think about it is like a cultural operating system that's just running in the background of our lives. It's this whole collection of stories and ideas, things like the American dream, for example, that shapes how we see the world and what we think we should want from it. And that, of course, includes where we should go on vacation.
So how does some big, abstract master narrative actually influence your specific trip to, say, Italy? Well, it's kind of like a funnel. At the top, you have the master narrative, these huge ideas about history, art, and romance. That gets filtered down into the local narrative for Italy. You know, stories about gladiators, amazing food, La Dolce Vita. And all of that comes together to help you create your personal narrative, the unique story you end up telling everyone about your Roman holiday.
To really get where these stories came from, we need to hop in a time machine and go back to the birth of the tourist. Because the way we travel now, it's actually a pretty new thing.
So, picture the 19th century. The Industrial Revolution gives people something they never really had before: leisure time. Then, in 1841, a guy named Thomas Cook comes along and organizes the first ever package tour, basically creating the template for modern tourism. Before long, even the working classes start traveling. Then, bam, the transport revolution. Trains, cars, and eventually cheap flights make the world feel a whole lot smaller. And now, we're living through the digital revolution, which has totally rewired the whole game once again.
And here's what's really wild. The reason we travel has completely changed. Back in the day, travel for the elite was almost like work. It was about useful discovery, mapping things, even governing colonies. But today, for most of us, it's about having fun, escaping our daily grind, and trying on a new lifestyle for a couple of weeks. The entire purpose has flipped on its head.
Okay, so we know our trips are shaped by these huge, deep-seated stories. But let's break down how that actually works for us as individuals. Let's look at the stories we end up traveling.
Think of every single trip you take as a story in 3 acts, just like a movie. Act 1 is pre-travel. This is all the research, the daydreaming, the Instagram scrolling. It's where your expectations are built. Act 2 is on destination. That's the trip itself, where the story in your head clashes with reality, with new stories you hear from locals and other travelers. And finally, Act 3 is post-travel. This is the story you decide to remember, and maybe more importantly, the one you tell everyone else.
Let's really dig into that first act, because it's so important. Imagining your destination. The mental picture we have of a place, the imaginary, is incredibly powerful. Sometimes, it's even more powerful than the real thing. Take Morocco, for example. For decades, it was marketed to Westerners with this powerful story of being this mysterious, sensual, and liberated place, somewhere you could go to escape the strict rules of home. That created a very specific expectation, right? It drew in artists and writers looking for freedom. Now contrast that with the story sold for New Zealand, an epic, untouched adventure, a real-life Middle-earth. Totally different story, totally different expectation, and a totally different kind of trip. These ideas are so strong, they actually make us mentally map the world into different zones before we even leave home. First, you have terra cognita. This is the known, safe tourist bubble. Think theme parks, resort areas, the main square. Then you've got terra intimitus. These are the places we know about but kind of avoid because we think they're risky, unless you're a thrill seeker, of course. And finally, there's terra incognita, the true unknown, the places that still promise genuine discovery.
So you see, the journey really starts in your head long before you ever step on a plane. And whether or not you enjoy your trip often comes down to how well the reality stacks up against the powerful idea you showed up with.
Of course, we can't talk about any of this without bringing in the massive elephant in the room, the internet. In the 21st century, the way these stories get made and shared has been completely revolutionized. So let's look at how the digital age has changed the game.
Technology has basically put that pre-travel story building on steroids. Airbnb sells us the idea of living like a local. Instagram and TikTok bombard us with an endless feed of perfect, idealized photos. We can walk down the streets on Google Maps before we ever get there. It's all right at our fingertips. But what's the result? Well, our trips are more planned out than ever, but they're also way more predictable, with almost no room left for surprise.
But, and this is the really crucial part, the digital age has also caused a massive shift in power. With your Instagram posts, your TripAdvisor reviews, your travel vlogs, you are no longer just a passive consumer of these big travel stories. You've become an incredibly powerful creator yourself, actively shaping the dreams and plans for millions of travelers who will follow in your footsteps.
So the next time you get back from a trip and you're scrolling through your photos, deciding on the right filter and the perfect caption, just ask yourself this. Are you just repeating the same old story you were sold? Or are you telling a new story, something more real, more authentic? Because the story you choose to tell becomes part of someone else's Act 1. So, choose it wisely.